Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're coming today with what I consider to be a very special uh, and urgent program. So I want everybody to listen in, put your taking action ears on to the greatest extent, and let's get into it. We have with us a comrade from Venezuela. Sierra with us, no stranger to some of our work with the Institute for Social Ecology and Cooperation Jackson and several other platforms that we've been on. And we just want to get straight into the discussion because it's very timely, it's very urgent. The U.S. is escalating its attacks and its threats of war against Venezuela. For those of you who are not necessarily familiar or haven't been monitoring kind of the situation, since the Trump regime has come into office, and particularly was the last 2 months, they've just been engaged in extrajudicial killings of folks in boats who may have been engaged in a number of different activities. Don't trust what you hear from the U.S. media. But they've just wantonly assassinated. I think it's 3 boats now. Just blew them up right off the territorial waters of Venezuela. Yeah, so let's get into it. Sierra, just immediately. You were just mentioning a quick second ago. I want to bring that to start with that. That it seems that this path to war seems to be this pursuit of war. Let me put it that way by the Trump administration, the Trump regime seems to be escalating. And there were some moves yesterday that you mentioned around cutting off dialogue between the two states. So bring us up to speed on what's happening there.
So sure. Of course, there's been a low intensity war against the Bolivarian Revolution for the past 27 years since the
Yes.
Bolivarian Revolution began. Sometimes more intense and sometimes low intensity. But indeed, since early August, there's been a buildup, a military buildup around the coast of Venezuela. Basically, the situation is that they've cooked up, the Trump administration has cooked up charges of trafficking on the government. Everybody knows, including the DEA, that Venezuela is not a producer of drugs, and it's actually a small. It might be a country through which a very small amount of drugs go through. This is according to the DEA and according to the UN report. And the US knows this. So they are just building up charges with their usual and always expressed intention of overthrowing the government of Venezuela. So that is the situation. We have a number of destroyers,
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8 destroyers along the coast of Venezuela, one nuclear submarine, and an airplane buildup that is actually posted in Puerto Rico, but that it is expressly there in relation to this military buildup against the people of Venezuela, against the sovereign project of the Bolivarian Revolution. There actually have been 3 very public um, extrajudicial attacks and killings of uh, of, of people who were at sea,
Mm-hmm.
and actually 2 more that we have learned about recently, also through the Trump administration, but not made so public. So we are on 5 known attacks on boats. These are people who are, um, like mostly fishermen who are doing their work, and they are being used as the symbol of this war against the people of Venezuela. Now, the situation in Venezuela is on the street. People are calm, but prepared. When the situation began, President Maduro made a call for people to voluntarily enroll in the militia, and millions of people actually enrolled in the militia, and millions of people are preparing to defend uh, La Patria, to defend the home of the Venezuelan people. So this is actually internally, if the enemy, if the U.S., if U.S. imperialism wished to generate internal chaos, which I'm sure they wanted to, internally they have not succeeded at all. There's actually greater cohesion. There's polls that say that 95% or more of Venezuelan people are against an attack on Venezuela. And of course, when we talk about 95% of the people, we are talking about a number of people who are not Chavistas, who are not with the Bolivarian Revolution. So this is important. It's important to understand this also. The situation in the street is calm. People are talking about the military buildup, but people are calm. People are calm, but preparing. So I guess we'll be talking a little bit more about what might happen. But the truth is that right now we don't know exactly what is going to happen, because indeed Grenell, and this kind of like circles back to your question, Kale. Grenell was the, we could say, the channel of communication that the Trump administration put there. He, about in February, March, he came to Venezuela, and he was the channel of communication that there was between the Bolivarian government and the Trump administration. So it's very serious that they've pulled the plug on Grenell. We are very concerned about it, because when there's no channel of communication, well, you know that anything can really happen, no? So we knew that anything could happen in principle, but while there was a channel of communication, uh, there might be a little bit more of a way of predicting. Right now, we don't even have that. It's very serious. It's a very serious situation.
And have they offered, because until you mentioned that, I'm a pretty avid follower of consumer of the news, and I didn't hear about this at all yesterday, which not too shocking. The
Yeah.
way that the news has been the mainstream capitalist media in the United States has been covering this. But did they offer any reason why they pulled the plug on Grinnell? I mean, why I can speculate, but
Well,
did they offer any official reason?
so I have not seen it. It actually happened relatively late last night, so that's why you haven't heard about it. And I haven't, between then and now, I don't have any particular information. If they have said, I don't think they've said why they pulled the plug on him, why they disconnected. But of course, we can speculate.
Mhm.
They are really building up towards a more complex situation, a more, possibly a more direct attack on Venezuela.
Yeah, just and for the audience, normally, yeah, when you cut off all diplomatic channels, that's usually a pretext to active maneuver, to active engagement
That's
in
right.
conflict. So let's hope that's not the situation. But given how rabid this regime is, unfortunately, we can't rule it out. Um, so this leads me to I want to kind of go broad now, based upon a couple of things that have been reported. Um, and I first want to start with the response from CARICOM and some of the Latin American, South American countries in particular that have been speaking out against the extrajudicial killings and against the threat of war. Have you all been seeing any kind of broad support from Colombia or CARICOM, and what is that kind of amounting to right now, in your opinion?
So Colombia, Petro has been the most supportive, and I would not even say supportive, the one who has had the correct line in relation to this buildup against Venezuela. He has said even that one of the boats that was bombed may have actually been coming from Colombia and requested information from the US, because we know very, very little about where these boats are shut down and who is on them. They actually destroyed them. In the one that was attacked on Friday, Trump made a very cruel actually comment. He said that they did it so well that there was nothing left,
Yeah,
that
that's
there
right.
were actually no remains left. So it's actually very difficult to know what is actually who is being killed in these extrajudicial killings, and even where, because they actually small boats that you won't necessarily see on a radar from the Venezuelan coast. They are for now the extrajudicial killings seem to be happening outside of Venezuelan territorial waters. So in this regard, Colombia has been extraordinarily coherent. The Colombian government has been very, very coherent. Now, with CARICOM and with other Latin American countries, the response has been more up and down. In fact, we should look first at, well, if we actually go closer to a closer island, Trinidad and Tobago,
Hmm.
is of great concern to us. Actually, Trinidad and Tobago is very, very close to the Venezuelan coast, and there has been a military buildup, actually, apparently, since 6 to 8 U.S. military buildup in Trinidad since apparently 6 to 8 months ago. But just very recently, they signed an agreement in terms of exploitation in um, in waters that are basically right between Venezuela and Trinidad, and that also comes with a military buildup. So, and other countries of CARICOM have been, I mean, like, of course, CARICOM countries are they have relatively precarious, or they have not relatively, they have totally precarious situations and dependency on the US. So we have tended to see weak responses from them. Um, that is of concern to us, but we also understand their conditions. At the Latin American level, of course, as can be expected, with Argentina, the Argentinian government right now is like the US government, a fascist or a neo-fascist government, and they are totally in support of whatever Trump does. Brazil has been a little bit lukewarm, and that is a concern because Brazil is, of course, the most important, the most important not only neighbor but player in terms of geopolitics. So Lula has been rather weak on this. However, Sheinbaum from Mexico has had a very coherent position, maybe not so constant as has been the position in terms of expressing concerns from Colombia, from Petro, but Sheinbaum has been very coherent. She actually has said that there's no relation between this so-called cartel de los soles that they cooked up, that there's no evidence that it exists, and that nothing from Venezuela has relation with cartels that actually do exist in Mexico. So that is actually very important when a president like Sheinbaum expresses this publicly. So that's a little bit the situation at the continental level. It's not great, it's not tragic, but it's not a great situation. We are not like we are not in the times of the strong um, integrationist wave that we lived some 10 or 15, rather 15 years ago. And we are feeling that we here in Venezuela, we feel the pain of not having a more unified, integrated continent, as was the calling, of course, of Chavez and of the Bolivarian Revolution, of all the Latin American revolutionaries. So that's a little bit the continental situation.
And yesterday we got some news that Trump and Lula are back in having some dialogue. Um,
Yes.
and the way it was reported concerns me, because the this is from a more liberal source in the United States, and it seemed to indicate that Lula, in trying to strike a deal, may be bending. And when I listened to it, it made me think about, is this why he's taking a lukewarm position towards the defense of Venezuela? Um, I don't know.
Well, yes, what I can say is that Lula has in this current Lula administration, he has been extremely focused on having a good relationship with the U.S. After the July 28th elections last year, his position was really, from my perspective, it was absolutely unacceptable,
Mhm.
uh, questioning the elections. And that was a very difficult moment because immediately after the elections, the I don't know, uh, some hundreds, if not thousands, of fascists, literally fascists, went out into the streets of Caracas, trying to overthrow the government and also directly threatening Chavistas, working class people, Chavistas. It was really a fascist outburst that we saw during 2 days. July 29th and July 30th of 2024. So in that context, he also kind of like played the cards of the enemy, questioning the results of the elections. And after that, his position towards Venezuela has been extremely lukewarm. In fact, they continued to question the results of the elections. It's absolutely absurd until approximately October or November of last year. That stopped when Trump came into power. It would have seemed then that he might have thought that he could have a good relationship with a Democratic administration, but that he realized that the relation with a Republican Trump administration wasn't going to go so well. So there were some signs of a correction from Lula. But right now, things may be changing again. Uh, it actually makes a lot of sense that the U.S. cannot cannot really break the way that it was, with Brazil. Brazil being actually an important economic player at the global level, even and a part of BRICS. It makes sense that the U.S. would not really want to break with Brazil. And since we know that Lula, or at least his government, is willing or desiring to be in good terms with the United States, that is of definite concern to us. Now, we could, it's like, I don't know if Trump is fickle or not. Sometimes he seems fickle, but sometimes he's also operating in agreement with the actual interests of a sector, of a fraction of the U.S. bourgeoisie. But will this, what I identify as a need for the U.S. to have good economic trade and good relations with Brazil, not antagonize them too much so that they go more towards the BRICS direction? Will the Trump administration be able to maintain a good relation with Brazil? I don't know. But what we know is that what I suspect, I should speak in first person, what I suspect is that the Brazilian administration is going to prioritize its relationship with the United States. And that is
Mhm.
painful, but we should really talk the truth, because we have to be prepared for whatever comes with the
Right,
truth in our hands.
right. And I just want to just bring up, and we can talk about it a little bit. Lula, for the audience to know and to bring back up, Lula blocked Venezuela's entry into the BRICS. right?
Yes.
Basically vetoed it. And the other piece, at least what some of us surmise, last week, Trump bailed out Milei and his fascist, policies in Argentina. And not all of the, none of Trump's deals are that detail oriented, right? And they're mostly concepts and not actual treaties or structured trade deals. But one of the things that we've heard and monitored, and maybe one of the causes, um, is to undermine Venezuela further by making it a condition of the bailout that his administration, his regime, would have control over Argentina's strategic oil reserves. Right, they have a government sponsor, a government control over that industry, and there's some indication based upon what they've said. Again, we haven't seen the actual terms of this bailout, but that he would have some access to control over those strategic resources, and trying to use that as a means to leverage against Venezuela, and then more strategically against China, and its kind of relationships with Venezuela and other Latin American countries. And the other kind of component is them trying to create a new military base, U.S. military base, at the very tip of Argentina, to try to better control all of the trade routes, right, and the military routes. And when you put that in context of what they have done in Panama, to kind of tighten their grip around the Panama Canal, there seems to be, there seem to be trying to control this hemisphere, right? The Monroe Doctrine 2.0, basically. And one of the key, my assessment, one of the key things in order to do that they have to do is really kind of knock off all of the different points of opposition, with Venezuela being the first one that they have to go to, and then try to discipline Brazil and Mexico in particular seems to be their kind of thinking. This is what my kind of fears are right now, about them escalating. And we should also just note that the Trump regime is moving in a lot of military artillery into the Gulf, apparently as another round of threat to Iran. There's a lot of indication that they may be on a build-up towards a more imminent strike against Iran. And what it makes me, let me check in with you. We'll see what you think. This last 2 weeks seems to be the Trump regime basically applying their flood the zone strategy, which was largely domestic, but now they're trying to do this internationally, right? As they've done some more consolidation with Venezuela and Iran, two oil producing countries, to be mindful in the race, that they are trying to take both of them out as a means of kind of escalating their war against China. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right on point, Kali. I mean, basically, uh, about 2 weeks ago, there was an article that was published in Politico. That yes, I think it's maybe a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago. There was an article published in Politico, and it's based on a leak from the Pentagon. And the leak from the Pentagon is about the new military policy uh, of the White House, of the Pentagon. And basically, there is a clear shift in that leaked document. Well, I have not seen the leaked document. All I have seen is what it has, what there is, the information that there is on the Politico article. And what it says is that there's a shift in the policy. The new policy represents a shift. The shift would be that the hemisphere, the continent, the hemisphere comes as the first priority. In earlier policies, it was stated that China, Russia, Iran were the priorities, but especially China. In those cases, the enemies. Right now, it shifts to saying that Latin America is the priority. That does not mean that they do not consider China and Russia to be their main enemies,
Hmm.
but it means more or less along the lines of what you have been saying, that they realize that to maintain the hegemony, they need to have control of the continent, both militarily and in terms of its resources, and also in terms of the of the labor force of the continent. So I think this is when we think about the current situation in Venezuela, it should be a concern not only to Venezuelans, but it should be a concern to all of Latin America. I think that what is happening here um, could represent the beginning of a
Hmm.
real turn of the United States. China has huge investments in Latin America. They are building ports, they are building infrastructure, they are collaborating, working hand in hand with several governments, including the Bolivarian government and the Cuban government. Russia, it's known, it's publicly the Venezuelan government and the Russian Federation government say they have signed military agreements. And Russia is actually, in military terms, extremely efficient. Like to build the cost of building, the cost and efficiency of building weapons in Russia versus the U.S. It's enormous. I'm
Hmm.
not saying that militarily the U.S. is not the superpower. It is still, but the fact is that Russia is growing very quickly, and Venezuela has agreements with Russia. So I think that indeed they are going to do the imperialism, U.S. imperialism, in this moment of crisis of its hegemony, is going to correctly for its interests focus more on the continent. And this is, of course, very dangerous for the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think that it is time to, I'll tell you an anecdote. Um, for the last, well, since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution, we have been saying, those of us here, the people of Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution, we have been saying that they are going to fully reactivate the Monroe Doctrine. Kind
Hmm.
of like being conscious that it wasn't, that Latin America and the Caribbean wasn't really the main focus of the United States. We've been saying it, but right now it is unfortunately true, and you call it Monroe Doctrine 2.0. That's a good way of talking about this moment. U.S. hegemony is, like it's precarious, and of course the United States has to be thinking creatively. And I think that the Trump administration, um, it maybe seems surprising, but I think that the Trump administration may be correctly assessing the crisis more with more precision than the Democratic administrations. And I think they may be building a plan that is according to the needs of these of the imperial power.
Hmm.
And I think that we need to begin to think about the Trump administration, and like about how the White House operates, with not as erratic, not as chaotic, but as the expression of, at least as I was saying before, the interest of a very powerful fraction of the U.S. imperialist bourgeoisie. If we think about the White House as a madhouse, if we think about the White House as something that operates chaotically, and that Trump is just a fickle person and he'll do whatever occurs to him, we will not be able to operate. The bourgeoisie does not operate in chaotic ways. Of course, they can get it wrong, but they plan and they organize to the best that they can defend their interests. So I think we have to start looking at the Trump administration kind of like more scientifically. I think that that's something that we have to do. It's difficult because because Trump presents himself indeed as random and chaotic, but I think that that's actually a trick that he has up his sleeve
Oh,
to further the plan.
yeah. No, this one, I'm glad you said that. This Trump 2.0, he has a team this time, and they let him do his show. But if you actually look at the maneuvers, they are dismantling, whole sections of the U.S. state with precision. It's not as chaotic as it looked. It's very targeted, very specific, very researched. They're undermining the unions. They're attacking the various elements of the civil service in the United States and the federal government that they know are actual Democratic constituencies, right? They're largely Black women who constitute roughly about 40%, or did constitute roughly about 40% of the federal workforce. Black women being really the bedrock of the Democratic Party apparatus, at least for the last 30 years. They're using this government shutdown to lay off more people with a more precise, orientation. They've gained the strategic upper hand in the negotiations around Palestine. We can go on. I mean, they are this team is very scientific, and they just kind of use the theater of his personality, I think, as a distraction while they are just moving with cold, hard precision on advancing their agenda. And sadly, I think we, like you said, we come to grips with they are making some headway in advancing, even in the face of what it looked like 2 or 3 months ago. They were kind of building more resiliency, let's call it, in Brazil and other countries towards seeking alternatives, or Canada. But the reality of the situation is it being in control so much of the world's finance, and it being in control so much of the kind of the consumption base of almost the entire world, that Carney from Canada is here in the United States today, basically trying to reopen, dialogue and lessen the trade. And best believe a good chunk of that is going to be on terms favorable to Trump and to the United States. So this game is not over. I think people are, I was telling many comrades, don't overplay BRICS, because it's not as consolidated as many of us would hope that it would be. The tensions between China and India have always been there, been very real. They don't actually align politically in a lot of fundamental ways. And even though Trump's, kind of isolation in the short term of Modi may be moving him closer to China and to Russia, but just the nature of the actual investments that, say, China has in India, as opposed to the United States and the UK have in India, they don't compare, right?
Right.
They just really don't. And so we always kind of have to be mindful of while there may be some initiatives that all the nation states like Brazil and Lula might take towards more independence, the reality is that we're all in a certain set of relationships in the global scale that still make the United States very what's the word? It still can call a lot of shots. It's still has the upper hand in a lot of cases. So we need to be mindful of that. Uh, which leads me to one of my next points. You spoke briefly about how things are on the ground in Venezuela. Um, could you say more just about where the Bolivarian process is now, and where are the communes, and what is what is the thinking around how to survive this particular wave, is what I would call it, of attack, and in seeing kind of the way forward, to kind of break the blockade, break the isolation, that the Venezuelan economy is being strangled on the international level. What is the thinking now on how to overcome some of these challenges and difficulties?
Yeah, well, um, that's an important question because to be solidarious with the people of a country, one has to understand what they are building. Something extraordinary is being built here in Venezuela against all odds. There are germs of socialism that are emerging here, and then I'll say against all odds, and we can also say because moments of crisis are also moments when something new can emerge. So, first of all, um, in recent times, I said this already, but I think it's important to highlight it since this whole thing began. There has been a huge voluntary mobilization of enlisting and preparing for the defense. I mean, we are talking about millions of people enrolling and preparing for the defense. Um, and many of those people are in communes. Communes are, or I would actually even say most of those people are in communes, some of more robust and some less robust. Communes are the cell for making socialism. Chavez begins to propose communes in 2009, although in 2006 there's already the law of communal councils, and communal councils by the thousands begin to get organized. Communal councils are grassroots, territorial grassroots democracy spaces. Say in a barrio, in your neighborhood, maybe 300, 400 families get together and they constitute a communal council, a direct democracy, assembly-based space where decisions are taken collectively. Now, communal councils um, basically are spaces where you solve day-to-day problems in your neighborhood. I don't know, the school, there's problems with lighting, whatever. It's basically uh, the space where you would go first to solve those day-to-day problems would be the communal council. Now, communal councils and them being assembly-based spaces, they do not have representation. They're profoundly democratic spaces. Formally, the sum of several communal councils makes a commune. But actually, communes are more than just a sum of several communal councils. There's a qualitative jump between a communal council and a commune, because a commune is the space from which we will transform society as a whole. So not only political, social relations, but actually economic relations too. Communes should have means of production. Not all communes have means of production. Actually, far from most communes have means of production. But communes, according to the plan, according to the idea, according to Chavez's roadmap, communes should have means of production, and the communes will be the places where we also transform social relations of production. In communes, when there is property, the property is social. Social property means that it's not private, of course. It's not the state. It's not cooperative. The surplus goes to the community as a whole. The surplus goes to the community via the assembly, and the communards in an assembly decide what to do with the surplus. So it's a profoundly, when we talk about communes, and when we talk about the Bolivarian process, we are talking about projects that are substantively democratic, where you not only choose who will represent you, but you actually have a voice in taking decisions, but you also are participant in the economy, not as an exploited. Of course, the working class in capitalism is a participant, but a participant as a maker of goods and an exploited subject. In this case, as makers of goods, of the goods that society needs, and the surplus goes back to the community. So we are talking about a profoundly different way of understanding society, It's a socialist project that puts at its center democracy. You know, I will not go into the details, but the real socialism had many virtues, and we have a lot to learn from real socialism. But for the truth is that the some of the um, despotic elements that are capitalisms, you know, like top-down organization and so on, kind of like got to be reproduced in that project. So Mesaros, the Hungarian philosopher, says that the metabolism of capital was reproduced in in
Mhm.
Soviet or in real socialism. We will not go into the details, but the communal pathway is a pathway that learns and tries to correct some of the earlier mistakes that we, and you know, as working class, because I consider that the Soviet Revolution is part of my history as a working class person, as a working class woman. But we make mistakes, so we have to learn from those mistakes. So going back to the present, what does this mean? That communists currently are very, very robust. There's a long way to go, mind you. I do not want to anybody to think that there's thousands of consolidated communes, but this is actually a very good moment for communes. Look, the since 2014, 2015, Venezuela was declared by Obama an enemy of the United States.
Mhm.
And a threat to the United States, an extraordinary threat to the United States. And after that, the sanctions, the unilateral coercive measures were imposed on Venezuela. They escalated year by year, with Trump being the one who put more sanctions on Venezuela. Trump won, the one who put more sanctions on Venezuela. So there's been this economic war against the people of Venezuela for quite a while right now. And in the hardest of times, which I would say would be around 2016, 17, 18. Now, in the beginning of the hardest of times, to make it more precise, because the hard times went on until 22, 23. Um, but in the beginning of the hardest times, communes began to become central, but in a very spontaneous way. So Chavez had proposed communes in 2009, but that was a time of peak commodities when the state, with a revolutionary government inhabiting it, was able to respond to many of the needs of the Venezuelan people. So there wasn't an urgency to organize communes at that moment. People loved the idea of making communes, but actually uh, it didn't fully take root in Venezuelan society. Many communes were made, many communes with extraordinary histories were made. There's wonderful stories about the early years of the communal project in Venezuela. But it actually is during those very hard years, 2016, 17, 18, where some communes here and there that already existed and some new communes began to emerge. Chavez, in his very famous coup, Golpe de Timon, strike at the helm speech in 2012, he said, "Commune or nothing." And basically, in the time of the nothing, because if you went to stores, there was no food. If you went to the pharmacy, there were no medicines. There was no gasoline in a oil producing country because we do not have the capacity to refine. It was really a very, very, very difficult time. In that time, in the hardest times, the communes spontaneously began to reemerge. Now, at that moment, the government had to focus on other issues, like how to sell oil, since we are banned from selling oil, but by the U.S. empire. So at that time, there wasn't much focus from the government in the direction of the communes. But the communes continued at it. They continued growing over these years. Some communes, I'm not talking about the whole country, but some
Mhm.
communes became kind of like the moral reserve of the Bolivarian Revolution and a referent. And the government over the last 3 to 4 years has actually refocused on the communes. This has been good for the for this has been good for the for socialism basically, but it has been good for the government to turn to where the people are building socialism. It actually remoralizes the people, and like the government gains from the learning from the communes. So this is what we have been living in the past few years. The past few years, even though they have been very hard, they have actually been good years too in revolutionary terms. This is an extraordinary thing because when people look at Venezuela, people who are solidarious with the Bolivarian process, they oftentimes imagine Venezuelans as victims, as mere victims. And of course, Venezuelans are suffering because of the blockade. But I think it's more important to identify Venezuelans as subjects of transformation. And every human being, every working class person is a potential subject of transformation. But here there are the conditions that the people of Venezuela are actually truly transforming their world, transforming this world, and that is how we enter this new phase. This new phase is very difficult. We may be facing an all-out war, but we are facing it with communes that are growing, with a roadmap, a revolutionary roadmap that is clearly defined, with a government that understands that the communes are central to this project, and with communards who are preparing to fight in the militia, with millions of communards who are preparing to fight in the militia. So I'd like to say that yes, we are very worried. We are actually scared. I mean, you could not be scared when you have 8 to 9 destroyers right around the corner. But we are prepared, and we think that if it comes, we will win. We will not win overnight, but we are prepared to do it. Iran is a good example too. I mean, Iran. You were mentioning Iran earlier, and I'll make it short because I'd like to hear from you too. But Iran is also an oil-producing country with a revolution. The two things work hand in hand, right? So why are Iran and Venezuela the enemies of? Why does the U.S. consider Iran and Venezuela its enemies? Because they have oil and because they have sovereign projects. The two things have to be understood
Mhm,
together.
mhm.
And Iran actually has faced more imperialist violence than Venezuela up to now, and they actually are there's no evidence of any fractures within the Iranian Revolution. So I think that if we look at that, and I think we are in. I mean, I want to be humble because the people of Iran are extraordinary and the Iranian Revolution is extraordinary. But we also have a more grassroots project than I think than the Iranian Revolution has, and that is also a virtue of our revolution. Uh, we for sure have other things that we are missing that they have, but the fact that we have a truly grassroots revolutionary socialist project that people identify with and that the government supports, that gives us an advantage um, in
No, I
this.
think you're right on that. I think unlike Iran, there's no Russia or China nearby. That kind of serves as a bit of a deterrent to the U.S. and to the EU, or to NATO, I should say more specifically. It's not really all of the EU, but and one of the things, just talking about the Iranian situation, one of the things that really makes me think, that Trump and his team are regrouping and making some headway, is that they were able to twist the arm of the European Union and of NATO to restore devastating sanctions on Iran, right after Israel and the United States, bombed them, right, waged war on them, for a week and a half without any, pretext against international law. And clearly Trump and his team did this as a precondition to the EU for their trade negotiations. So, it was basically kind of if you want more favorable terms and conditions, not only will you have to buy weapons from the United States, to kind of perpetuate the war in the Ukraine, but you're going to also have to do our bidding. That is my particular read based upon statements and based upon this kind of U-turn, because it has normally been the EU that has been counseling more dialogue with Iran historically, and been more open to do that. So this pivot didn't just come out of nowhere, particularly in the context of what's happening. And when you put it in context, you know, um, this year very clearly, the last couple of months, the focus of kind of the anti-Zionist, struggle has shifted to Europe. It was, 2023, very much kind of, I would say, it was global, but I would think the epicenter of it I would describe was the student movement with the student intifada in the United States. That clearly has shifted over into Europe. Uh, um, and with the EU now talking about not doing any trade, we'll see if they actually execute that. I doubt if they will, but they're at least having some dialogue. And you have folks like Kearney up in Canada saying that he would actually execute the ICC recommendations to arrest Netanyahu. So there's been a pivot, but the EU is a project which, at the end of the day, is a vassal of the United States, and
Absolutely.
they are going to, at this rate, without any clear leadership calling for a break or a rupture, and then any social movement strong enough at this point to do what you all have done, say in Venezuela, is going to continue to kind of toe that line. So we
Hmm.
are. My read, you asking me, we are in a very volatile situation on a global scale. We have been for years, but I think, we're a few minutes away from the open engagement of World War IV. Is what how I've been pressing it, and desperation, particularly the desperation of the United States to kind of maintain its hegemony, really should put the world on notice. They are going to do everything they can to retain power in firmly in their hands, and this is not a culture and a bourgeoisie that is inclined to share much of anything, which makes it extremely, extremely dangerous, given how armed the United States is. This the most armed society to ever exist, and don't think otherwise. Um, so it's a very dangerous situation. One thing that folks may take some comfort is that I think the United States, I think Trump and his regime are engaged in a bit of overreach. It's going to be hard for them to wage war with Venezuela and Iran and support the Ukraine and engage in a domestic, campaign all at the same time. So they're going to have to make some strategic choices. I don't think they fully have figured that out yet, like what they're really going to prioritize. I do think, if anything, they're probably going to try to prioritize, at least in the short term, the domestic situation. Because if they can, ensure the outcome they want in 2026, either by rigging the midterm elections or just outright canceling them, they're setting up both of those dynamics. Um, that might consolidate their position further to then wage more wars internationally to retain their grip. But if we, our forces on the ground here, if we're able to kind of hold off their consolidation domestically, that may create more room for folks internationally. That is at least my hope. We'll see if the social movement here can play its part. One of the big tests is actually coming up on the 18th with this kind of No Kings initiative, we'll see, I think, have a stronger assessment of our kind of collective strength, and I think will to a degree, to see, are the ICE and the National Guard invasions of all these democratic cities, is it having a chilling effect politically, or are folks having enough? Hopefully, it'll be the latter rather than the former, but we'll have to see.
Indeed, I mean, we also follow with concern and, of course, with solidarity for the working class of the U.S. What is on there. I think that the Trump administration does have to get its grip more fully internally, and but that represents a lot of violence. It would be on the 18th. Indeed, will be an important day to see how much capacity there is to mobilize in a unified way, and there seems to be signs that it's going in that direction. So our solidarity from here, because even if we are facing a difficult situation, it's not easier. It's actually not easier because the U.S. is actually militarized already. So we do not have troops on Venezuelan ground, but uh, the U.S. working class has imperialist troops right around the corner in the very territory. So we are aware of what that represents in terms of the struggle.
Well, my last question, we got about like 2 minutes, Sarah. What would you propose that those of us listening to this in the United States, what kind of solidarity could and should we be offering to Venezuela right now?
Well, I actually think that mobilizing against the fascist Trump administration uh, is the first thing. I mean, the 18th, whatever comes soon, whatever marches there are for Palestine is a march for Palestine is also a march in support of the Bolivarian Revolution, the peoples of the world, but specifically of the Bolivarian Revolution, because we are also more directly being targeted. So I think mobilization. Of course, there are simple things. I actually. Uh, I'm, I'm not one to think much about institutions, the structures of the U.S., but also writing letters to congressmen and senators. But of course, that should not be the focus. But if you are at home and you cannot do much, well, why not? I mean,
Do.
write a letter against an aggression against Venezuela. But more importantly, in the streets, and let it be known that this is a people who have their own project. This is a people who the Venezuelan people aim to have a sovereign homeland where we can build a new world, solidarious world with all the oppressed people of the world. Actually, internationalism is a core value of a revolution that is called Bolivarian. Bolivar was it's kind of like the figure that represents Latin American liberation. He represents the vocation of integration among working peoples of, in this case, of Latin America. So think about this project as a project that's not foreign to the struggles wherever you are, and let it be known that this aggression is an aggression to overthrow a democratic government, and a democratic government that's actually promoting a substantively democratic change in terms of organizing life, which are the communes. So always thanks for solidarity and support the spaces, support the Bolivarian Revolution, be for the collective, the project of collective emancipation, but of course a struggle wherever you are, because I mean our enemy is the same enemy, and if you can overthrow your enemy, you're overthrowing our enemy, and vice versa.
All right, Sarah. I want to thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us, for taking the time. Please keep us updated as things progress. We'll do our best to keep informing folks so we can be in active engagement and solidarity and try to stop this war that's being threatened against the Venezuelan people.
Thank you so much, Kali. It's important to have these conversations. Our solidarity with the working class of the United States.
All right, take care. This is Kali signing off, and catch you all next time. Thank you.